We're just bombarded with information 24/7. And you'd think, with all that noise, we'd be seeing everything that's going on, right? But what if I told you that some of the biggest, most critical stories on the planet are unfolding right now, almost in complete silence?
So you gotta wonder, what are we missing? What massive stories, things that are changing millions of lives, even the future of our planet, are just falling through the cracks? Well, today, we're gonna pull back the curtain and look at a few of those stories. For instance, we're gonna talk about a nation that's trapped in what might be the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth. Then we'll look at a country that's just completely collapsed into chaos, basically run by gangs.
And finally, a place where an entire culture is being systematically wiped out. And look, these are just a handful of the stories that really need our attention.
Okay, so let's dive into our first section. We're talking about the staggering human cost of today's forgotten wars. Just take a second to think about this number. 18 million people. That's how many people are facing extreme desperate hunger in Sudan right now. And that includes 500,000 kids who are literally starving to death. And here's the thing. This isn't some drought or famine caused by nature. Nope, it is the direct result of a brutal civil war that honestly most of the world isn't even talking about.
So what's going on? Well, at its heart, it's a nasty power struggle between two military groups who are actually supposed to be on the same side. You've got the official army, the SAF, and then there's this really powerful paramilitary group, the RSF. See, they ruled together after a coup in 2021, and the plan was for them to merge. But that didn't happen. The mistrust just boiled over, and boom, all-out war in April 2023. And since then, the RSF has been accused of some truly horrific stuff, like ethnic massacres, especially out in the Darfur region.
Now, let's jump over to Myanmar, where the military junta is using a different and frankly terrifying strategy. It's called the Four Cuts Doctrine, and it's as brutal as it sounds. The idea is to basically build an invisible wall around resistance areas. They cut off everything: food, money, intelligence, and even new recruits. The goal? To literally starve the opposition into giving up, forcing huge numbers of people to flee their homes. But here's the thing. The people are fighting back. And it's not just one group. On one side, you have the top Madal. That's the military junta. But standing against them is this huge, diverse coalition. You've got the elected government that was forced into exile. You have ethnic militias that have been fighting the military for decades. And maybe most incredibly, you have these People's Defense Forces. We're talking regular, everyday people who've picked up weapons to fight for their future and their democracy. And if you want to see just how fast things can fall apart, look at Haiti. It's just staggering. Back in 2021, the president was assassinated, which created this huge power vacuum. Flash forward to 2024, and armed gangs actually teamed up. They launched these massive coordinated attacks, broke into jails, took over the ports. They essentially seized control of the entire capital city. And the result of all that chaos? Today, almost half the country doesn't have enough to eat, and over 1.6 million people are right on the edge of actual famine.
Okay, so we've talked about conflict. Now let's shift gears to a different kind of crisis. This one is a lot quieter. It's not making headlines every day, but trust me, it's just as catastrophic. We're talking about the environmental disasters that are unfolding just out of the spotlight.
All right, first up, let's talk about something called the embark. I know it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. The best way to think about it is like it's the planet's heart and circulatory system. It's this huge system of ocean currents that pumps warm water up toward the north and sends cold water back down south. This whole process is what regulates our global climate and, for example, keeps a place like Europe from being a frozen wasteland. It is absolutely crucial.
So the scary question is, what happens if it stops? Well, scientists have been warning us that because of global warming, the embark is getting weaker. It's slowing down, and it could be getting dangerously close to a tipping point. If it collapses completely, parts of Europe could see their average temperatures drop by a shocking 15 degrees Celsius, and this would happen fast, within just a few decades. Meanwhile, the southern hemisphere would get even hotter. This isn't some gradual change we're talking about. It would be a sudden, whiplash-inducing climate shift.
Here's another one of those silent collapses. And this one is happening quite literally right under our noses. For almost 30 years, a team of scientists in Germany painstakingly tracked insect populations. And the results? They are just mind-blowing. They found a 75% drop in the total weight of flying insects. 75%. Now, why should you care? Well, because insects pollinate something like 80% of our wild plants. They're the foundation of the food chain for so many other animals. To see them vanishing like this, it's a massive red flag that our ecosystems are in deep, deep trouble.
You know, we all hear about the Amazon rainforest, right? But let me ask you, have you ever heard of the Miombo woodlands? Probably not. And that's crazy, because it's Africa's largest continuous forest. It's home to endangered species, and over 65 million people rely on it to live. And yet, it gets almost zero global attention. Meanwhile, an area the size of 140 football fields burns down there every single day, mostly to clear land for farms or to make charcoal.
Okay, so for our last section, I think it's really important we connect the dots here. Because these crises, the wars, the environmental collapses, they don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're often the result of problems that have been simmering just beneath the surface for years, even decades. They're about long-term struggles, injustice, and frankly, our collective habit of looking away.
A chilling example of this is what's happening in China's Xinjiang region. The Uyghur people, who are a Muslim ethnic minority, are being subjected to this massive, systematic campaign of repression. Human rights groups say that over 1 million people have been thrown into detention camps for things as simple as growing a beard. The whole campaign involves 24/7 surveillance, forced labor, and even forced sterilizations of Uyghur women. It's a full-on effort to erase their culture and religion, which many have labeled a genocide.
But even in the face of stuff like that, people are pushing back all over the world. Take what some folks are calling a Balkan Spring. It's this wave of protests sweeping across the region. In Serbia, it was a deadly building collapse that everyone blamed on corruption that got people into the streets. In Slovakia, it was anger over a new pro-Moscow government. But what's really amazing is seeing how these different movements are inspiring each other. They're even borrowing symbols, like this Pikachu character that first popped up in Turkish protests and then showed up at rallies in Serbia. It's pretty incredible.
So when you step back and look at all of this, from the war in Sudan to the disappearing insects in Europe to the protests in the Balkans, you start to see that none of these are isolated events. They're not just random bits of bad news. They're all symptoms of the same thing, a world dealing with fragility and injustice and problems that we've allowed to fester in the dark, way outside the glare of the headlines.
And look, the reality is, while it's simple, attention is a finite resource. There's only so much we can focus on at any given time, right? Between the 24/7 news, our social media feeds, just living our own lives, our bandwidth is limited.
And that leaves us with one last big question, a question we can't really avoid. Since we know our attention is so limited and so valuable, that means we're all making a choice, whether we realize it or not. So the question isn't if we're missing something. Of course we are. We always will be. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, which stories will we choose to see?